They say blood is thicker than water. What they don't tell you is that in corporate America, marriage is thicker than competence, and family connections will always outweigh a decade of results. I learned that on a Tuesday afternoon in March, sitting in my home office with a video call timer ticking in the corner of my screen. 14 minutes remaining on a call that would end my career at Whitmore Industries. Not because I'd failed, but because I'd succeeded in ways that made the wrong person look bad. My name is Grace Nakamura, and I used to be the Vice President of Operations at Whitmore Industries, a manufacturing conglomerate with facilities across 3 continents and annual revenue just north of $2 billion. I'd spent 11 years climbing that ladder, starting as a logistics coordinator, promoted to regional manager, then director, then vice president. Every rung earned through results that couldn't be argued with. Efficiency improvements that saved millions. Supply chain optimizations that competitors tried to reverse engineer. A track record of turning struggling facilities into profitable operations. 11 years of building something I was proud of. And it was ending in a 14-minute video call with a man who'd been with the company for 18 months and had accomplished nothing except marrying the CEO's daughter. Bradley Whitmore Crane sat in his home office, positioned carefully in front of a bookshelf filled with volumes he'd never read, wearing the expression of someone who'd been practicing authority in front of a mirror. 34 years old, MBA from a program his father-in-law had donated to, and Chief Operating Officer of Whitmore Industries because Victoria Whitmore had said yes at a beach wedding in Turks and Caicos 2 years ago. "Grace," he said, and his voice had that particular quality of someone who'd been coached on how to deliver difficult news. Sympathetic but firm, the tone of a man playing a role rather than living one. "I want to thank you for everything you've contributed to Whitmore Industries over the years. Your dedication has been noticed and appreciated." The past tense. That's always how you know. "However," he continued, "we've made the difficult decision to restructure our operations leadership. The company is moving in a new direction, and we need a team that's aligned with that vision. Your position is being eliminated effective immediately." I looked at the timer in the corner of my screen. 13 minutes and 42 seconds remaining. The call had been scheduled for 15 minutes exactly. I'd noticed that when the calendar invite arrived, had wondered why such a specific duration for what was labeled simply discussion. Now I understood. 14 minutes to be fired. 14 minutes to have 11 years of work dismissed as misalignment with a vision that consisted entirely of Bradley's desperate need to prove he deserved his title. "May I ask what specifically prompted this decision?" I said, keeping my voice neutral, professional. The voice of someone who'd learned long ago that emotions in corporate settings were weapons that could be used against you. "It's not about any single thing," Bradley said, and I watched him glance down, reading from notes probably prepared by HR. Probably reviewed by lawyers who wanted to make sure nothing actionable was said during these 14 minutes. "It's about strategic direction. The board and I have been evaluating our operational priorities, and we feel that fresh leadership will better serve our goals going forward." Fresh leadership. The euphemism for replacing experienced people with cheaper ones, or, in this case, with people who wouldn't challenge Bradley's authority by knowing more than he did. "What about the Meridian project?" I asked. "We're 3 weeks from launch. I've been leading that initiative for 8 months. The Meridian project will continue under new leadership. We've identified internal candidates who can step into the role." "Who?" Bradley's expression flickered, annoyance at being questioned, quickly suppressed. "That's still being finalized, but rest assured, the project is in good hands." I knew who it would be. David Chen, Bradley's golf buddy, who'd been hired 6 months ago as a special projects director, despite having no manufacturing experience. David, who'd been in exactly 3 meetings about Meridian, and had contributed nothing except questions that revealed how little he understood about what we were building. "The Meridian project represents 18 months of development and $40 million of investment," I said. "The supply chain integrations alone took my team 6 months to negotiate and implement. David Chen doesn't understand any of that." "I didn't say it would be David. You didn't have to." Silence. The timer showed 12 minutes and 15 seconds. "Grace, I understand this is difficult, but the decision has been made. HR will be in touch about severance and transition details. We're prepared to offer a generous package in recognition of your years of service." "How generous?" 6 months of salary, full benefits continuation, outplacement support. It's more than standard for your position level. 6 months, $72,000 after taxes, maybe $80 if the benefits were calculated favorably. For 11 years of work, for millions of dollars in value created, for the institutional knowledge that was walking out the door with me. And my team, I asked, the people who report to me? Organizational changes will be communicated through appropriate channels. I'm not able to discuss other personnel matters with you, which meant more layoffs were coming, more experienced people eliminated to make room for Bradley's friends, for the consultants he'd been bringing in, for the new culture he was trying to create, a culture that valued loyalty to Bradley over competence at the actual work. I'd like to speak with Richard, I said. Richard Whitmore, the CEO, the founder, the man who'd built this company from nothing and who'd always, at least in my experience, valued results over politics. Bradley's expression hardened. Richard is fully aware of and supportive of this decision. He's asked me to handle the transition directly. I've worked with Richard for 11 years. I think I'm entitled to a conversation. You're entitled to the severance package we've outlined and a professional transition process. If you'd like to contest the terms, you're welcome to consult with legal counsel. Bradley glanced at something off camera, the time probably checking how much longer he had to endure this call. Is there anything else you need to discuss? 11 minutes remaining. 11 minutes to decide whether to fight, to argue, to demand explanations that wouldn't change anything. 11 minutes to accept that the person sitting across from me, digitally, distantly, safely insulated by miles of fiber optic cable, had already won because he'd married the right person. I want the severance terms in writing before I sign anything, I said, and I want a reference letter from Richard directly, not from you or HR. I'll have to check on the reference letter. Richard's schedule has included a monthly lunch with me for the past 7 years. We discussed the business, the team, the long-term strategy. He knows exactly what I've contributed. If he's unwilling to write a reference letter, that tells me something about how this decision was actually made. Bradley's jaw tightened. I'd struck a nerve, the nerve of someone who knew that his authority was borrowed, that his position was given rather than earned, that the person he was firing had relationships he could never build because they were based on respect rather than obligation. I'll pass along your request, he said stiffly. HR will be in touch within 48 hours. Your system access will be terminated at the end of this call, and building security has been notified about your badge. If you have personal items in your office, arrangements can be made for retrieval. System access terminated. Badge deactivated. The digital and physical locks change simultaneously, the modern equivalent of being escorted out by security. I have proprietary notes on the Meridian project, I said. Documentation that only exists on my laptop. Without that, whoever takes over is going to struggle significantly. All company property should be returned through the appropriate process. Any proprietary information belongs to Whitmore Industries, regardless of where it's stored. I'm not talking about stealing it. I'm talking about the fact that critical knowledge for a $40 million project is about to walk out the door, and you apparently haven't thought about how to capture it. We have documentation processes. I'm sure the transition will be smooth. He wasn't sure of anything. He had no idea what documentation existed, what tribal knowledge had accumulated, what relationships and understandings made the Meridian project work. He was firing me without even understanding what he was losing, like a child breaking a toy he didn't know how to operate. The timer showed 8 minutes and 30 seconds. Bradley, I said, abandoning the professional distance I'd been maintaining. I've watched you for 18 months. I've seen the decisions you've made, the people you've hired, the projects you've championed. You don't understand this business. You don't understand manufacturing, supply chains, operations, any of it. You got this job because of who you married, and everyone in this company knows it. His face reddened. That's completely inappropriate. What's inappropriate is firing your most experienced operations executive 3 weeks before the biggest project launch in company history because she made you look bad in a board meeting by knowing more than you did. This has nothing to do with the board meeting. It has everything to do with the board meeting. When Robert Castellano asked about supply chain risks and you gave that rambling non-answer, and I stepped in with actual data and analysis, you decided right then that I had to go because I made it obvious that you don't know what you're doing. 7 minutes remaining. Grace, I'm going to end this call. HR will be in touch. You're going to end it because you can't defend yourself. Because everything I'm saying is true, and you know it, and you're terrified that Richard will eventually figure it out too. Richard trusts my judgment. Richard trusts his daughter's happiness. That's not the same thing. And when Meridian fails, when the timeline slips, when the integrations break, when the savings projections don't materialize, he's going to start asking questions you can't answer. Meridian isn't going to fail. It will if David Chen is running it. It will if you keep firing everyone who actually understands how things work. It will because you're optimizing for loyalty instead of competence, and that always eventually produces disaster. 6 minutes and 12 seconds. Bradley's expression had shifted from defensive to something harder, more dangerous. The look of someone who had power and was deciding whether to use it punitively. "Your severance offer was generous," he said slowly. "It doesn't have to stay that way. If you're going to make accusations and create problems on your way out, we can revisit the terms." Is that a threat? It's an observation about how these situations can go. People who leave gracefully tend to have better outcomes than people who leave bitterly. "I'm not leaving bitterly, I'm leaving honestly. There's a difference." "HR will be in touch," Bradley said again, and his hand moved toward the trackpad. "I wish you the best in your future endeavors." "Bradley," he paused. "When this falls apart, and it will, remember that you had a chance to keep the people who could have saved it. Remember that you chose pride over competence. Remember that the company your father-in-law spent 40 years building is going to be damaged because you couldn't handle being less capable than the people who worked for you. Goodbye, Grace." The call ended. The timer had shown 5 minutes and 4 seconds remaining. He'd ended it early, unable to sit through even 14 minutes of accountability for what he'd done. I sat in my home office, looking at the blank screen where Bradley's face had been, feeling the strange mixture of relief and rage and fear that comes from having your professional identity stripped away in less than 10 minutes of actual conversation. 11 years. Gone. The aftermath was procedural and humiliating in the way that corporate terminations always are. HR called within the hour to discuss severance terms, the same 6 months Bradley had mentioned, with no reference letter from Richard, just a form letter from the company confirming dates of employment. My system access was indeed terminated. When I tried to log into email, the screen showed, "Account suspended. Contact your administrator." The process felt designed to strip away dignity one piece at a time. A security officer called to schedule retrieval of personal items from my office. I wasn't allowed to go myself, had to provide a list of what I wanted and wait for someone else to pack it and ship it to my home. My corporate credit card was canceled before the call with HR had even ended. The company car I'd been driving for 7 years needed to be returned within 48 hours. 11 years of service, and they treated me like a potential threat. Someone who might steal files or sabotage systems or cause scenes in the lobby. The protocol was standard, I knew, applied to everyone regardless of tenure or position. But the standardization made it worse somehow. I wasn't even important enough to be treated as an individual case, just processed through the same termination machinery as anyone else. I didn't contact anyone, didn't beg for explanations or appeal to the better nature of people who'd already shown they didn't have one. Instead, I did what I should have done years earlier, started documenting everything, not proprietary information, not trade secrets, not anything that belonged to Whitmore Industries, but my own records, emails I'd forwarded to myself over the years documenting decisions and outcomes, performance reviews that showed my contributions, board presentations I'd created that demonstrated the value I'd generated. The paper trail of 11 years of excellence, preserved against exactly this kind of moment. I'd learned that habit early in my career, from a mentor who'd been pushed out of her company after a leadership change. "Always keep your own records," she'd told me. "The company's records belong to the company. Your achievements belong to you. Make sure you can prove them even if your access gets cut off." It had seemed paranoid at the time. Now it seemed like essential survival skill for anyone working in corporate America. And I started making phone calls. Not to lawyers, not yet, but to people in the industry who knew me, who'd worked with me, who'd watched what I'd built at Whitmore, the network I'd cultivated over a decade, the relationships that existed independent of any corporate structure. The first call was to Margaret Okonkwo, CEO of Precision Manufacturing Solutions, a competitor I'd known for years from industry conferences and the informal networks where operations executives shared knowledge and war stories. "I heard rumors," Margaret said when I told her what happened. "Bradley's been making changes, bringing in his people. Everyone's been wondering when he'd get around to you." "You knew this was coming?" "I knew it was possible. You're too competent, Grace. You make him look bad just by existing. People like Bradley can't tolerate that." "What are people saying about Whitmore? Honestly?" Margaret was quiet for a moment. "Honestly, that it's becoming a mess. The consultants Bradley brought in are billing enormous hours without producing results. The Meridian project is behind schedule. Everyone in the industry knows, even if the press releases say otherwise. And the senior talent is leaving or being pushed out. You're not the first, and you won't be the last. How bad is it going to get? Depends on how long Richard lets Bradley run things. If he steps in soon, maybe they recover. If he doesn't, she trailed off. Richard's getting older. Victoria is his only child. My guess is he's trying to make this work for her sake, even if it means watching his company struggle. I thought about Richard, 73 years old, still sharp, still engaged, but increasingly willing to delegate to Bradley because that was easier than managing the family dynamics that came with overruling his son-in-law. What would you do if you were me? I asked. I'd take some time to process, then I'd start looking for opportunities that match your capabilities. And I'd keep my eyes on Whitmore, because when things get bad enough, there may be openings you'd want to be positioned for. What kind of openings? The kind that emerge when companies realize they've made terrible mistakes and need to fix them quickly. The next 3 months proved Margaret right about almost everything. Meridian launched 6 weeks late, after the timeline slipped twice and Bradley had to personally apologize to the board for the delays. David Chen, who'd been given my role on the project, made decisions that anyone with manufacturing experience would have known were wrong, accelerating timelines without adjusting resources, cutting corners on testing to meet the revised schedule, ignoring warnings from the engineers, who actually understood the technical requirements. I heard about it from multiple sources. Former colleagues who were still inside sent me careful, deniable messages about what was happening. Industry contacts shared what they were hearing from Whitmore's customers and suppliers. The manufacturing world is smaller than people think. Everyone knows everyone, and bad news travels fast. The launch itself was a disaster, not catastrophic. No explosions, no product recalls, no immediate customer defections, but unmistakably disappointing. The efficiency gains that had been promised didn't materialize. The supply chain integrations I'd spent months building were poorly maintained and started failing within weeks. Customer complaints increased. The projected ROI that had justified the $40 million investment was quietly revised downward, then revised again, then stopped being mentioned in earnings calls altogether. 3 of Whitmore's major customers started exploring alternatives. I knew because 2 of them reached out to me directly, asking if I was available for consulting work, wanting to understand what had gone wrong and whether their own operations might be vulnerable to similar failures. I declined both requests, partly because I wasn't ready to work directly against my former employer, partly because I was still processing what had happened and needed time to figure out what I wanted next. The industry press started asking questions. Manufacturing Weekly ran a piece about leadership challenges at Whitmore Industries that didn't mention Bradley by name, but made clear that the company's recent struggles were related to personnel changes at the senior level. A trade publication quoted anonymous sources describing a culture shift toward loyalty over competence that was affecting operational performance. I followed the coverage through industry publications and through contacts who were still inside Whitmore. The picture that emerged was exactly what I'd predicted, a company slowly degrading because the people who knew how to run it were being replaced by people who knew how to please Bradley. Rachel Kim, who'd been my deputy for 4 years, called me one evening after a particularly bad week. "It's worse than you know," she said, her voice tight with frustration. "David Chen doesn't understand the supply chain relationships you built. He's making demands that are damaging years of goodwill with our vendors. 3 of our best suppliers are threatening to move us down their priority list." Can't someone explain that to Bradley? No one can explain anything to Bradley. He doesn't want to hear that his decisions are wrong. He wants to hear that everything is fine and he's doing a great job. And anyone who tells him otherwise ends up on his list. His list? The list of people who are not aligned with the company's direction. The list of people who'll be next to go when he needs to make room for more of his friends. She paused. "I'm probably on it. I've pushed back too many times." Then start documenting everything. Keep your own records and start networking, quietly, so you have options when the time comes. "I know, I learned that from you." Another pause. "Grace, is there any chance you'd come back if things change?" "I don't know. Right now I can't imagine it. But ask me again in a few months." 4 months after I was fired, I got a call I hadn't expected. "Grace, this is Richard Whitmore." I hadn't spoken to him since the termination. He'd sent no message, made no attempt to reach out, apparently accepted Bradley's framing that I was simply not aligned with the company's direction. "Richard, this is unexpected." "I imagine it is. I owe you an apology, and I owe you an explanation. Do you have time to meet? In person, if possible." We met at a restaurant we'd been to many times during those monthly lunches. Quiet, upscale, the kind of place where business conversations could happen without being overheard. Richard looked older than I remembered, the weight of the past months visible in his face. "I made a mistake," he said after we'd ordered. "I let Bradley convince me that the changes he was making were necessary. that the people he was letting go were obstacles to progress. I trusted him because he's family, and because I wanted to believe that Victoria had married someone capable of eventually running the company. And now I've seen the Meridian numbers. I've talked to the board members who are asking questions I can't answer. I've watched good people leave and seen what replaced them. He paused. I've realized that I put family loyalty above company survival, and that was wrong. What do you want from me, Richard? I want you to come back. Not reporting to Bradley. I'm restructuring the leadership. Bradley will remain in a role, but a reduced one. I need someone to fix what's been broken, to rebuild the operations team, to get Meridian back on track. You want me to clean up the mess your son-in-law made? Yes. He didn't flinch from the characterization. I know it's a lot to ask. I know how you were treated, how the termination was handled. But you're the best person for this job, Grace. You always were. I should never have let Bradley push you out. I thought about the 14-minute call, about Bradley's threats and condescension, about the 6 months of severance that was supposed to buy my silence and cooperation. What happened to Bradley? What did you tell Victoria? Richard's expression tightened. Victoria knows her husband is struggling. She's not blind, but she also loves him, and she doesn't want to see him humiliated. We've agreed that Bradley will take on a different role, special projects, client relationships, something that uses his strengths without putting him in charge of operations he doesn't understand. And he agreed to that? He didn't have a choice. The board was asking for changes. It was either a graceful transition or an ungraceful one. I imagine Bradley receiving that news, the humiliation of being demoted, of having his father-in-law finally acknowledge what everyone already knew. Part of me felt satisfaction at the justice of it. Part of me just felt tired. What exactly are you offering? I asked. Executive Vice President of Operations, board seat, which you should have had years ago, compensation that reflects your importance to the company, full authority to rebuild your team, to make the decisions that need to be made. It was everything I'd wanted when I was fired. More, actually. More money, more power, more recognition than I'd ever had. I need to think about it. Of course, take whatever time you need. But Grace, I hope you'll say yes. Not for my sake, not even for the company's sake. For the sake of the work you've been doing for 11 years, for the people who are still there, who need leadership they can trust. I thought about it for a week, talked to Margaret Okonkwo, who counseled caution but acknowledged that the offer was genuine and the opportunity was real, talked to a lawyer who reviewed the proposed terms and found them favorable, talked to my husband who asked the only question that really mattered, what do you actually want? What did I want? Not revenge. That was too small a motivation for a decision this significant. Not money. I'd been comfortable before, would be comfortable again regardless, not even vindication, though there would certainly be some of that in returning to a company that had fired me and was now begging for my help. What I wanted was to finish what I'd started, to see the Meridian project become what it could be, to rebuild the team I'd spent years developing, to prove that expertise matters, that competence matters, that the people who actually know how to do things are more valuable than the people who merely know how to maneuver politically. I called Richard on a Saturday morning. I'll do it, I said, but I have conditions. Name them. Bradley stays out of operations entirely. No involvement in Meridian, no authority over my team, no ability to influence decisions that affect the work I'm responsible for. Agreed. I want the authority to make personnel decisions without interference. If I need to hire people Bradley fired, I can. If I need to fire people Bradley hired, I can. Agreed. And I want a public statement from the company, not from you personally, but from the company, acknowledging that the restructuring that led to my departure was a mistake, not an apology, just an acknowledgement. Something that makes clear to the industry, to our customers, to our employees, that what happened wasn't because I failed. Richard was quiet for a moment. That might be difficult. It implies criticism of Bradley. It implies that the company made a mistake and is correcting it, which is true. If you're not willing to acknowledge that publicly, how can I trust that the correction is genuine? More silence. Then, I'll make it happen. It might take some negotiation with the board, but I'll make it happen. Then we have a deal. I returned to Whitmore Industries on a Monday in August, 5 months after the 14-minute video call that had ended my first tenure. The announcement had gone out the Friday before: new leadership, strategic reorganization, acknowledgement that recent changes had not achieved desired outcomes, and that experienced leadership was essential to the company's success. The exact language had been negotiated carefully. Richard had wanted something warmer, more personal, an apology of sorts. The board had wanted something minimal, legally safe, that wouldn't invite lawsuits from Bradley or anyone else affected by the changes. What we ended up with was corporate speak that somehow managed to say what needed to be said without explicitly saying anything at all. But people understood. The industry understood. When Grace Nakamura returns as executive vice president 5 months after being fired, and the announcement acknowledges that recent changes had not achieved desired outcomes, everyone can read between the lines. The reception was warmer than I'd expected. People I'd worked with for years stopped by my office, the same office I'd had before, restored to me as if the intervening months hadn't happened, to express relief, to share stories about what had gone wrong in my absence, to ask when we could start fixing things. Rachel Kim was one of the first to visit, closing the door behind her and letting out a breath she seemed to have been holding for months. "Thank God," she said. "I was about 2 weeks away from quitting. David Chen wanted me to lie to a supplier about payment timelines, and I couldn't figure out how to refuse without ending up on his list. You don't report to David anymore. He's being moved to a different role." "What role?" "One that doesn't involve managing people or making operational decisions. Something where he can do less damage." Rachel's expression mixed relief with something more complicated, the survivor's guilt of someone who'd made it through when others hadn't, combined with the satisfaction of seeing incompetence finally face consequences. "What about Bradley?" she asked. "Reduced role, special projects, client relationships, things he can actually succeed at without breaking core operations." "Richard actually did it? Demoted his son-in-law?" "The board gave him a choice: fix the leadership problem or watch the company continue to decline. Family loyalty only goes so far when your largest customers are threatening to leave. The damage was significant but not irreparable. Meridian needed substantial rework, 6 weeks of focused effort to fix what had been broken during the botched launch. 3 key suppliers had to be re-engaged after relationships had deteriorated. The efficiency gains that had been promised were achievable, just not on the timeline that had been projected. I rebuilt the team, brought back 2 people Bradley had fired, who were relieved to return and came back with something to prove. Let go of 3 people Bradley had hired, who were clearly not capable of the work they'd been given and who left with severance packages more generous than they deserved. Created a structure that valued expertise over connections, results over politics. The work of repair was detailed and exhausting, but also satisfying in a way that only fixing something broken can be. Every problem solved was proof that the problems had been solvable all along, that what had gone wrong wasn't inevitable, but was the result of specific bad decisions made by specific unqualified people. Bradley I saw occasionally, in hallways and meetings where his reduced role required his presence. He was civil, distant, clearly humiliated, but trying to maintain whatever dignity remained. I felt no satisfaction in his diminishment, only the recognition that he'd done it to himself, had been given every opportunity to succeed, and had chosen instead to prioritize his ego over his effectiveness. Victoria, I met once at a company function where she appeared on Richard's arm, the dutiful daughter supporting her father's business. She approached me during a quiet moment, her expression complicated. "I want you to know that I don't blame you," she said. "For what happened with Bradley, he made his own choices." "I don't blame you either," I said. "You couldn't have known how it would play out." "I knew he wasn't ready. I hoped the job would help him grow into what the company needed." She paused. "I was wrong. Love made me wrong." "Love often does." She nodded, and we stood in silence for a moment, 2 women who'd been caught up in the collision between family and business, between hope and reality. "He's happier now, you know," Victoria said, "in the new role. Less pressure, less expectation. He can actually succeed at what he's doing, instead of failing at what he wasn't capable of. That's good, for everyone." It was too. Bradley in a reduced role was better for the company, better for the employees, probably better for Bradley himself. The tragedy wasn't that he'd been demoted. It was that he'd been elevated in the first place, given authority he hadn't earned and wasn't prepared for, set up to fail by people who loved him too much to be honest about his limitations. The Meridian project relaunched 6 months after my return, and this time, it worked. The efficiency gains materialized, the supply chain integrations held, the ROI projections were met, then exceeded. The board praised the turnaround, the customers noticed the improvement, and the industry took note of a company that had recognized its mistakes and corrected them. I think about that 14-minute call sometimes, about Bradley's practiced sympathy, his scripted condescension, the timer ticking down on my career, while he read from notes prepared by people who didn't know me. 14 minutes to end 11 years of work. Less time than it takes to have a proper conversation, to understand what's being lost, to consider whether the decision being made is actually wise. But those 14 minutes taught me something important, that corporate structures can protect incompetent people and punish capable ones, that family connections will always complicate business decisions, that the people who fire you often don't understand what they're losing until it's gone, and that sometimes, if you're patient and fortunate and good at what you do, you get a chance to prove them wrong, not through revenge, not through bitterness, but through the simple act of being excellent at work that matters. Bradley fired me because I made him look bad by being good at my job. Richard brought me back because the company needed someone good at the job Bradley couldn't do. There's a lesson there about value, how it's recognized, how it's measured, how it survives the politics and ego that try to suppress it. The timer on that video call had seemed so definitive. 14 minutes to end everything? 14 minutes for Bradley to demonstrate the power he'd been given and I'd been denied. But timers run out, and what seems permanent in the moment rarely lasts. Bradley had 14 minutes to fire me. The consequences of that decision took 5 months to fully develop, and will probably continue unfolding for years. The relationships damaged, the projects delayed, the talent driven away, the reputation compromised, all of it traceable back to a man who had power without wisdom, authority without understanding, the confidence of someone who'd been told his whole life that he was special and had never been required to prove it. I don't hate Bradley. I did for a while. In the immediate aftermath of that call, in the weeks of procedural humiliation and professional uncertainty. But hatred requires energy, and I had better uses for mine. Now I mostly feel something closer to pity. He's a man trapped in a role he didn't earn and can't perform, married to a woman who loves him but knows he's failing, working for a father-in-law who's finally accepted that family loyalty has limits. That's not a comfortable position to be in. And unlike me, Bradley can't rebuild somewhere else, can't prove himself in a new environment, can't separate himself from the company where his failure has been so public. He's stuck, forever defined by the job he couldn't do, and the people he hurt trying to pretend he could. Richard Whitmore will retire within the next few years. He's said as much, privately to the people who need to know. When he does, the question of succession will become urgent, and I suspect I'll be part of that conversation. Not as CEO, that's not my ambition, and the board will want someone with broader strategic experience, but as the person who keeps operations running, who maintains the relationships that make the business work, who provides continuity and expertise while new leadership finds its footing. It's not the ending I imagined when I started at Whitmore 11 years ago. I thought I'd climb the ladder steadily, accumulate titles and responsibilities, retire eventually with the satisfaction of a career well spent. I didn't anticipate being pushed out by someone's unqualified husband, or watching the company struggle because of decisions I'd warned against, or being brought back to fix damage that should never have been done. But maybe that's the more honest ending, the one that acknowledges how messy corporate careers really are, how much depends on factors beyond your control, how the path from beginning to end is never as straight as it looks in retrospect. She had 14 minutes to end the call, but the call wasn't really the ending. It was just the intermission before the real story began.